Joining us now, Trump campaign senior advisor Steve Cortes. Steve, as we just reported in the latest Fox poll in the overall horse race, Biden leads Trump by 5 points, 51% to 46. But I want to drill down on some of the internals on key issues: coronavirus, law and order, and race. More voters trust the vice president, while Mr. Trump leads on the economy. So far, the president has not broken through, Steve.
Well, I think he is breaking through on the most important issue, which is the economy. You know, there's a lot of cross currents, of course, in 2020. Many things about this year are unique and singular, but I still believe that the ultimate driver of the electoral decision for most Americans is going to be what it typically is: who can create prosperity for me, for my family, and for this country going forward. And on that score, the president has a compelling story to tell, particularly given the current economic renaissance that is unfolding in this country. This country is coming back with gusto right now. All of the recent economic data show that. This is the president who produced the first Trump boom, and the American people, I believe, will smartly rehire him to continue to produce and compel the Trump boom 2.0.
What about the fact that he trails Biden by a substantial margin on the issue of who you trust more to handle the coronavirus?
Look, regarding coronavirus, I think here's the reality. I think, unfortunately, corporate media has been relatively successful at pushing out a myth that the president mishandled the virus. And I actually, when I look at, for instance, these revelations from Woodward, I think if you look at them in the context of the totality of actions taken by this president, it actually reveals an exemplary record of crisis management. And what I mean by that is it's very clear that the president early on, during the fog of biological war, when the information coming in was disparate and at times even contradictory, he made two determinations. Number one, that he was going to reassure the American people that he was going to be the kind of leader who convinces the people that we can persevere through this epidemiological Pearl Harbor. But then secondly, he also took decisive action. He made the command decision to harness the full power of the federal government to do two things primarily. He did a lot of things, but the two main drivers to protect the people were, number one, he restricted travel, first from China, then from Europe, eventually basically effectively sealing the United States border, something that hadn't been done in this country since 9/11. But then he also commenced the largest government-mandated manufacturing campaign in this country since World War II, and the swiftness and vastness with which the government produced PPE, medical devices, and also overflow capacity for hospital systems around this country that ultimately wasn't needed, thankfully, but was there nonetheless. That record, I believe, reveals a record of superb management, actually, of the virus.
Well, you brought up the Woodward book, and let's talk about the president's what you call superb management. All of these polls were conducted, at least in part, before the public learned the revelations from Bob Woodward's book, which are essentially that the president was saying something very different and much more alarming to Bob Woodward in private than what he was telling the public. Take a look.
You just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. So this is deadly stuff.
It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for. When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done.
So he's telling Bob Woodward that this is deadly stuff and much worse than the flu. In fact, he said 5 times worse than the flu. And in the public, he's saying we're going to be down to zero and it's no worse than the flu. Why not level with the American people, Steve?
Chris, here's what's important. We have to look at the timeline there. And again, this was the fog of war, of biological war, and the information was shifting. The medical experts and the scientists, their views.
Steve, I'm going to interrupt you. Steve, I'm going to interrupt you right there because there wasn't the fog of war. On January 28th, the president got his presidential daily brief, the top intelligence in the Oval Office, and at that point, his national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, said, this is the biggest challenge you're going to face in your entire presidency, and the deputy national security advisor, Matthew Pottinger, immediately compared it to the Spanish flu, the deadly Spanish flu of 100 years ago. So there was no fog of war there. The word he was getting from his top intelligence and national security people was that this was a deadly pandemic. There was no fog here.
No, there was tremendous fog, and let me tell you why. That was their view. You're exactly right. However, Dr. Fauci, somebody who is lionized by critics of President Trump, somebody who clearly is not looking to carry water for the MAGA movement or is not a Trump partisan, Dr. Fauci, as late as February 29th, he appeared on national television on the Today Show and said that no Americans should change their customs of life. Okay, so this was the fog of war. Opinions and views and analyses were shifting dramatically among the scientists, among the politicians this entire time as we were trying to learn about the virus. By the way, Dr. Fauci said that, and days later, literally, he was advocating for a national shutdown, something that then happened 2 weeks later in the middle of March. So I think it's unfair for you to characterize things as if they were solid and unchanging. These were shifting facts, shifting analyses. And by the way, part of why we knew so little is because the Chinese Communist Party, who is the ultimate culprit in all of this, not Donald Trump, not the Democrats, no American, the Chinese Communist Party lied to the world. They could have shared the scientific and health information with the world early on, and in all likelihood either contained this virus to Wuhan itself, or if it did get out of Wuhan, at least help the world to deal with it effectively. Instead, we were searching largely in the darkness to try to figure out the scientific facts. And again, the scientists themselves were shifting their views dramatically during this period.
Steve, your explanation is somewhat different from the president, because you're saying, well, the president didn't really know it was the fog of war, but when he has described it, he said he didn't want to panic the country. He didn't want to jump up and down and panic the country. Whoa. And one of the reasons that there's a question about that is because of the fact that the president plays the panic card all the time, especially when he's talking about Joe Biden. Take a look.
If Biden wins, the mob wins. If Biden wins, the rioters, anarchists, arsonists, and flag burners win.
Peacefully protest. Peacefully protest.
Is that a president who is trying to keep the country calm?
There's a key difference here. When the president is talking about legitimate fear of what can happen in America if Joe Biden were to win, and if disrespect for the police were to continue to become the norm in this country, he is trying to exhort the American people to action, to say we can stop this, we can back the police, we can restore order, we can insist on the rule of law. That is sensible to recognize that there's legitimate fear out there in the country. What is not helpful would be to tell the American people that this virus is out of control, because what would happen? Things like hoarding, which was happening anyway at that time. It was already commencing. The president's job in a time of crisis is partly to be reassuring to the American people, to convince them that we can and will persevere through this epidemiological Pearl Harbor. And that's what he did. He was reassuring to the American people. At the same time, he was taking decisive action. He didn't just offer flowery phrases and then sit back. What? No, he reassured the people and took command decisions.
Steve, I got it. I got your point. The argument would be that it's a false choice you're making. He either plays a rosy scenario or he sets his hair on fire. There is something in the middle, which is just being honest with the American people. And there's a question, Steve, as to whether or not the president is still being honest with the American people. I want to play what he and Dr. Fauci said this week about how long the coronavirus is going to be with us. Here they are.
We're rounding the turn. You see what's happening. You see the numbers are plunging.
If you're talking about getting back to a degree of normality, which resembles where we were prior to COVID, it's going to be well into 2021, maybe even towards the end of 2021.
Those are very different messages. We're rounding the turn versus the end of 2021 about how long the virus is going to be with us.
Sure. Listen, clearly, the president has a far more optimistic view right now than does Dr. Fauci. But let me also point out, even within the scientific community, there's tremendous debate. For example, there's people like Dr. Atlas from Stanford, Dr. Risch from Yale, a lot of folks within science who would disagree with Dr. Fauci. The president is now making, I think very properly, a really optimistic case that we are nearing the end of this, that the trends are going aggressively toward health. And regarding Fauci, by the way, because I think this is critical, on this issue of supposed discrepancies, Fauci on your network just a few days ago made it very clear that he doesn't believe the president was being dishonest. And let me be precise and quote him. He said, this is Dr. Fauci talking about the president. He said, I didn't see any discrepancies. What he told us, what we told him, and what he came out and said publicly. And again, nobody's going to accuse Dr. Fauci of being a Trump partisan. He said no discrepancies here.
In an interview on MSNBC on Friday, he said something different. I find it interesting that sometimes you're citing him as an authority and sometimes you're saying he's wrong. One last question. I've got only time for this on the campaign. As we said, millions
I just
of
said the president has a more
all...
optimistic view. I didn't say Fauci's wrong. I'm just saying the president has a more optimistic view about the virus right now.
Well, I mean, but Dr. Fauci is the leading infectious disease expert in this country. Scott Atlas, who you referred to, isn't even an infectious disease expert. He's a radiologist.
There is a range of view within the scientific community, clearly. And by the way, the president's job, though, is not to just rotely take the advice only of scientists, as if that is the only input that matters. It's a critical input, absolutely, into making policy. But as are other considerations, for instance, not just physical health, but also mental health, also the economic vitality of our country, national security.
Well,
he has to synthesize a variety of inputs.
You're changing the subject, though. We were talking about the question of how long the virus is going to be with us. One last question about the campaign, and that has to do with the issue of early mail-in voting, because at this point you seem to be losing that race. And let me put up some numbers. In key swing states, Florida and North Carolina and Pennsylvania, Democrats lead Republicans by hundreds of thousands of requests for mail ballots in two of those three states by more than 2 to 1. Between the president talking down mail-in voting, Steve, and the fact that you've gone largely dark in a lot of these states in terms of TV ads, aren't you spotting the Democrats a big early lead?
Well, I don't think so. And first of all, too, we have not gone dark in overall advertising. We're doing a heck of a lot of digital advertising in those states. But what I would say regarding mail-in is, look, in 2016, we were losing the race until Election Day and then won it big on Election Day, at least big electorally. And I have the same view this time around. I think in all probability, we don't know for certain, by the way, a lot of those Democrats could be voting for President Trump. Just because Democrats request a ballot doesn't mean they're voting for Biden. But regardless, I would concede that it's probably going to be a similar scenario where when we look back retrospectively, we will probably see that the president was down into Election Day and then won Election Day itself by an incredibly wide margin. Right. And I say that, by the way, largely because of the enthusiasm gap, which is very real between our supporters and Joe Biden's.
Well, and it's certainly true. Thousands of people showed up for that rally in the middle of basically nowhere in Nevada last night. So, Steve, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Always good to talk with you.